For today's tutorial with Made and Making, we're going to be making some lovely fabric storage pots. So this one here is made out of denim and isn't lined, and then this smaller one here is a reversible one, so you could either have the duck egg blue fabric on the outside or the yellow. So these are really simple make, but can be used for a whole variety of things, from covering vases and being little cutlery stands on your table, to being a pencil pot or a scrap basket for your fabric leftovers. So really simple and can be used for a multitude of uses. So what do we need to get started? So the brilliant thing about these storage baskets is that you can use all sorts of fabric. Today I'm going to use this sticker fabric. This is more like a curtain fabric or a cushion making fabric. So I won't use any interfacing, but if you were using a lighter weight fabric, maybe a quilting cotton or dressmaking cotton, you could always use interfacing to apply some stiffness to the back of the fabric and make it a bit stronger. So you can use any fabrics for this. These fabrics were actually taken out of a fabric sample book that I got hold of ages ago and have been sitting in my craft room waiting for me to do something with them. You can make the pots any size you like. This small pot here is great for cutlery on the table or pencils, etc. to go in it, or bigger pots can be great for scrap storage or whatever. So the size of your pot can be relatively flexible unless it is going to go around something very specific. I've prepared 2 bits of fabric here for the outside and 2 bits of fabric here for the lining, the inside, but this will be a reversible fabric basket, so the fabrics could be used either way. And these fabrics are 12 inches tall by 8 inches wide, and they've had the bottom corners taken out ready for the corners to be boxed, and I've taken out a 1.5 inch square. So what that means is that this bit of fabric at the bottom is actually going to turn around and be the inside or the bottom base of my pouch. So even though I've cut 12, I'm going to lose at least 1.5 inches off the bottom. So just think about the fact that whatever you cut, maybe take away 2 inches if you're cutting out a 1.5 inch square to work out the final height, because that piece is going to turn out underneath. Similarly, at the moment it is cut 8 inches wide, but both of these bits here at the side are going to make the sides of the basket. So that 8 inches is going to become down to something like 5 inches once I've lost these side bits to wrap around, like on this one. So that would be the front, that's the bottom bit that turns under, and that's the bit that turns round to the side. So first things first, what we need to do is place the 2 pieces right sides together, like so, and right sides together like so, making sure that everything's matching nicely. If it isn't quite matching perfectly at the bottom, just give it an extra trim. If I just flick this over and pop a pin in down here and down here, and then do the same on the blue one, I can just check how my boxing has worked out at the bottom, because when you're cutting things out by hand with scissors and you're not cutting 2 at the same time, yeah, you can see just here this one's going to need a little tweak probably, and the same on this one. So that's fine, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down the long sides and across the bottom down here on both pieces of the fabric. Okay, so I've just run them through the sewing machine, and this is the green one, which will be the outside one, I think, and I've got stitching going down the sides and across the bottom down here. I use the edge of the presser foot for my seam allowance. You don't need particularly wide seam allowance, this is just a craft project. So yeah, edge of my presser foot is my seam allowance, and I've done a bit of reversing at the top and bottom of all my seams because that's really going to help me today. The next step is to box the corners. So if you've not boxed corners before, one of the easiest ways of doing this is by cutting out the square in the bottom corners, and we cut out a 1.5 inch square. And what we're going to do now is just pull those edges apart and bring them up flush with each other, and it should sit nice and straight like so. And then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to nest my seams. So if I just give them a good squeeze, this is a nice fabric, it creases really easily. You'll see that I've got one seam allowance going that way and the other seam allowance going that way. So my seams are nested, and I'm just going to pull those edges nice and flat, and then I'm just going to pop a pin in there, and that will hold it for me as I pop it through the sewing machine. And then I'm going to do that to the 2 corners on each layer of our fabric basket, so that we've basically made just one piece of this. So this will be the outside and the other one will be the inside. So it will already be quite buckety, baskety shaped. So I'm just going to pop that through the sewing machine, and I'm just going to use exactly the same seam allowance that I used on the sides, which is the edge of my presser foot. So that's our 2 layers now completed at this stage. You can see that I've got a bucket shape that side, and I've also got exactly the same with the other piece of fabric as well. So we're going to turn one of these the right way round, so I'm going to turn the lining the right way round. Just going to push my hand down inside like so. Looks a bit like a bag of flour. And then I'm going to push this down inside the other one so that the right sides of the fabric are going to be together. Like so. And then the thing to look at is the side seams. So we're going to match the side seams up like this, nest our seams just like we did before, and pop a pin in that side. And then we're going to go to the other side of our pouch basket, and we're going to nest the seams again, match the seams up, and pop a pin in that side. And then on a pouch of this size, a basket of this size, you should find that maybe one other pin halfway down the side should be sufficient. You shouldn't need lots of pins on something like this, unless maybe you've got a tricky fabric that you're working with. So we've got 2 pins where it counts, where we're trying to match up seams, and then we've got another pin either side, so we've got 4 pins going around this. Now we're going to sew all the way around, but we are going to have to leave an opening. So just in your mind, have it clear where your opening is going to be. I tend to keep it away from the seams so that the seams are nicely anchored. So it'll either be this side or that side. And the seam allowance that I'm going to use around the top is exactly the same as before. I'm just going to use the edge of my presser foot. And I'll now sew around the top of the seam. Now when you're sewing around something circular like this, you've obviously got to manage it through the machine, and the top tip is to always work from the inside edge. So when I put this over to the machine in the moment, I will be working from this side here rather than trying to be working from that side there and working with the outside fabric on top. I'll be working from in here with the lining fabric on top. At my machine, I can show you exactly how that works. So I've got my baskets over to the left, and I'm working on the inside edge of the rounded top that I'm closing shut now, and I'm just using the edge of the presser foot as the edge for my seam allowance. So I'm just going to sew round like so, and I'll just stop occasionally and feed the next bit forward ready. Stop, roll it round, and then the next bit is waiting for me. Stop, roll it round, and the next bit is waiting for me. So a little bit further. And there we go. With the basket all sewn up now, apart from my opening, the next job is to put my hand down inside and start to pull it through. Oh, taking out all the pins. Just one there. So we're just going to turn it through like so. And then at this stage, you're going to push out your outside so that you can then push your lining down inside. So I'm now making sure, or trying to make sure, that all my corners line up with my hand, like so. And then at the top of the bag, basket, whatever you'd like to call it, I'm now going to bring the seam right up to the edge, like so. And then I'm just going to pop some pins in, just to hold it. So I'm going to start at my edges where the seams are, because that's where it's going to be chunkiest. And I'm now going to work all the way round, popping my pins in. And exactly the same principle in a moment for sewing around the top. To sew this shut, I will be sewing on the inside edge. So that's the side that I'm going to be sewing from. So that's where I'm going to make sure my pins are for easy reference and to take them out. So I'm just going to pin all the way around the top. This is now all pinned. But I just wanted to point out to you how fabric choices can make a difference to a project. So this is quite a crisp cotton. It's a heavier weight fabric because it's designed to be used for soft furnishings. And what that means is that as I've turned it through, everything has finger pressed really nicely into place. So it's been quite an easy process to get all my pins in, to get everything looking nice and crisp, to turn in the folded edges where the opening are, ready to sew around it. And when you're making your choices, fabric choices for any project, just think about the project, what you're going to be using the final project for, whether it's dressmaking or home furnishings. And so just look at the fabric that you're considering buying and how it's behaving. If it's fraying right where the fabric's been cut from the last person, then it's going to fray a lot as you work with it, and that might be quite hard. This actually frayed quite a bit, but it was manageable. But if it's something that you're going to want to be quite nice and crisp, choosing a fabric which creases really nicely can be to your advantage. So I'm just going to whiz this through the sewing machine using exactly the same principle as for when we sewed the two bits together, sewing from the inside. So I'll be sewing from this blue edge here. And the nice thing about that as well is that when we come to turn it over, that line of stitching is going to be this line of stitching here that we see on our project. If I was going to be sewing this shut around the top, but this was going to be the shown edge, I would be tempted to push this inside out and sew it from the outside edge so that the best stitching was on the outside. Sometimes the stitching on the underside of a sewing machine is not as crisp or as clear or as neat as the top side stitching, and that's why we always top stitch from the right side. So I'll just top stitch around the top of this. Top stitching done, I'm now finished. I've used a really light grey thread, so it's blended in nicely on both sides of my project, and even where the cream is, it's blended in quite nicely as well. So just to recap, we started off with a piece of fabric that was 12 inches tall by 8 inches wide, and I spoke to you about how bits of the fabric were going to wrap around the sides and around the bottom. So what does that all mean? At the base, we can see we've now got a project which is 3 inches across, which is as I would expect from the 1.5 inch corner that we took out. So we've gained 1.5 inches either side. And then we've ended up with a base which is approximately 4 inches wide. So we started off with 8 inches of fabric and we've ended up with something about 4 inches wide by taking out a 1.5 inch corner. In terms of the height of the project, we've now ended up with something which is just under 10 inches tall, and we started off with 12 inches of fabric. And all of these decreases are just due to the boxing at the bottom of the basket and also seam allowances that we've taken in at the same time. So the boxing would have taken in an inch and a half rather down there, but we've also lost seam allowances, which is probably another half an inch or so. Hence we've shrunk from 12 to just under 10. So project's finished. I can just roll over the top edge like so, and then I've got quite a nice stripy contrast on that side. And if I flip it over to that side, even though my inside fabric had trees on it, which obviously are directional, that looks kind of okay on the outside on that side as well. So I'm really pleased with that, and that probably will go into my cupboard and be used to store my flour in, because we've got wire shelves that we store our flour in, and it's forever ripping the bags. And just looking at that, it looks the perfect size for a bag of flour. So I think I'm going to slide my paper flour packet into that, and then when it gets a bit too dusty from the flour, I can just pop it through the washing machine and bring it back out. Hope you've liked that tutorial, and stay tuned for more. Thanks very much. Bye. Just a couple of top tips for the fabric baskets is this one's made out of quite a nice firm fabric and is standing up quite nicely on its own. This one is just made out of the bottom of a leg of a pair of jeans. So there's the bottom hem there. I didn't bother lining it, and all I did was sewed the end of the jean shut and then box it off in exactly the same way. Didn't trim my threads. So that's a really nice way of using the denim up when you make yourself into a pair of shorts because you've stained or whatever your trousers. And then the last thing just to say to you is that if you're using smaller ones to stand things in which are taller than they are, my tip is to throw a pebble in the bottom. So these are tablecloth weights that I use outside in the summer. And what I do is I just pop one of those in the bottom, and it just helps stabilise the pot for my cutlery, stops it falling over.